Thank you, Comrade Pak Chong. I must say, very seldom am I addressed as comrade, and I take it as a great honor. But where Pak Chong is concerned, it is not just banter. My thanks is also to him, as we all are, for SIRD and for Gerak Budaya. If not for those, I think a lot of the publications that we have put together would not have been so easily published. Now, I must also thank the organizers, in particular, Professor Yue Ping and Ms. Su Yixing. Again, not just for the common courtesies of inviting me, but for dragging me to present at this conference. I must say that initially I was very reluctant, a little lazy, revisiting Malaya, my Malayan history not so good. I didn't bother to think too far ahead. But they were kind enough to meet up with me, try to explain what they were trying to do, and got me hooked. I will thank especially Professor Wei for something more than that, which I will explain towards the end of my talk. She helped me to conclude my talk in a way that I think makes it far more, what is the results word? Far more, longer vision. Right. Now, to look at the question of revisiting Malaya, I decided that we have to look at the processes across different time frames in Singapore history. Right, just a brief introduction. 1946, we were cut off from the peninsula by the British returning after the Second World War. And by and large, one can say that the people of Singapore and the political parties and so forth were all assuming that there will be a reunification. If it doesn't come automatically, there will be a push for this. Okay? Lo and behold, 1963, we are merged with Malaysia in the merger campaign. Right? It was very short-lived, barely 2 years, 1965, Singapore and Malaysia separated. Okay? From then on, the Malayan dream has been submerged. Not exterminated, submerged, for more than 50 years. Okay? Only in more recent years has this dream been revived. And this is the process that I would like to trace. Now, this, I contrasted what we call the Malayan dream, okay, with something I call the Singapore story, okay, brackets, the Malayan nightmare. The Singapore story talks about how Singapore was kicked out of Malaysia, right, due to circumstances that are really a betrayal of Malaysia as Singapore government understood it. So, what we have to do as Singaporeans is to prove to the Malaysians that we can survive, we can be better than you. You are our nightmare. We want nothing to be like you. Hence, I use the term the Malayan nightmare, which is what the Singapore story is about, the Singapore dream is about. Okay? This has been very, very powerful in the Singapore psyche. Okay? Let me begin by, I'd like to read a fairly long article out from a blog. Okay? It's easy to understand. So I didn't bother to do a PowerPoint because I think it hampers me. But the context is this. In 2009, it is March, I think. Yes, it is March. The Straits Times published a book review, okay, featuring a book called Our Thoughts Are Free. Our Thoughts Are Free. It is a book of poems edited by Tan Jin Hui, Teo Solang, and Koh Kay Yew, all three of whom had been former political prisoners in Singapore. It is a collection of poems and containing also one prose piece by 7 former political detainees who were imprisoned in different times. 1950s, some 1960s, some 1970s, some 1980s. I think this shows the extent to which the Internal Security Act, under which such detentions were legislated, has been so often used in Singapore. Alright. Now, here I would like to acknowledge Professor Raman Embong's quip about how victors write history, losers write poetry, and memoirs. So yes, poetry plays an important part in this. Okay, for one thing, it's supposed to be safer to begin with. You don't think it attracts that much attention. But I must also say it's not just poetry. I can add poetry and memoirs. Okay, what losers do. Losers also do, by the way, obituaries. Okay? What I mean is that one of the earliest signs, alright, of resistance, let's put it this way, that I've put my finger on, are obituaries put in the newspapers when prominent left-wing people died. Okay? One of the earliest was not even a political detainee, not a leftist, but the mother of a leftist. Lim Chin Siong's mother passed away in the Chinese newspapers. A photograph, okay, a dedication to say what a great mother to have produced a great son, to whom the obituary of it's a condolence, okay, was expressed. Lists and lists and lists of names of political detainees, names that never make it into the public forum in any other instance. When Chin Siong himself died, okay, again the same thing. When T.T. Raja, a left-wing lawyer, died, again the same thing. The same list of names, the insistence on the sense of solidarity, on the sense of we exist. Okay, we are not non-people, we are not non-persons. But this was a very gradual process. But that is how I think it was testing the grounds in the mid-1990s. But let me get back to March 2009 and the book Our Thoughts Are Free, this book of poems by generations, represented by almost every decade. I think starting with Said Zahari, and then of course Ingrid himself, Joshua Lang, people like that, whom I will mention. Right? Now the Straits Times, as I've said, gave it a fairly interesting positive review. Alright? The reviewer noted, I quote, the heartfelt accounts of those who experienced first-hand painful aspects of Singapore's recent past. Alright? Meaning political detention for prolonged periods of time, okay, and not under very pleasant conditions. Right? Now, it is quite something for Straits Times to even review the book, not to say give it a fairly positive count. Okay? The Straits Times article goes on to say, these stories provide a counterpoint to the official accounts of the security threats that serve to justify each successive waves of detention. So of course, internal security, all these detentions has been glossed over, it's been explained by the government as being for the security and safety of the country because these are subversive communities. Right, so this poetry book offers a counter to this portrayal. Even though this was presented in a very positive light by the Straits Times, there's a larger, it was actually against the popular imagination of what these people are like. So I found a blog site by Johnny Brett, who's a very, very respected veteran of blog writing in Singapore. Alright? He writes on all sorts of political matters, social matters. He himself is an activist, especially in not only gay rights, for which he's very well known, but also transient workers, the migrant workers. To this day, Alex R. is very involved in these matters. But Alex did not attend the book launch held in Singapore of this particular poetry book, but he was in Kuala Lumpur when there was there was a Kuala Lumpur book launch as well. Alex R. happened to be in KL. When I wrote, I said, he must have come for this. He didn't. He happened to be at another affair, another meeting. He came over. And he was saying to himself, what? I asked myself, what is the political significance of the event I am writing about? And he gave us the answer right from the start of his blog. The answer seems to be none. No political significance for him. Okay? In fact, not only was it no political significance, I would say that Alex Au was greeted by the Singapore nightmare. Now he writes this. Francis Khoo told the room that he would open his remarks with an introduction in Malay. Now Francis Khoo was a former political detainee. He was not a former political detainee. He was about to be detained. He managed to escape. So he was a political exile. Francis passed away recently. So Francis Khoo came to the KL launch. He can't go to Singapore. And so he writes poetry. He wrote poetry, he wrote songs. So Yawning Bread, the blogger, said, Francis Khoo told the room that he would open his remarks with an introduction in Malay, Singapore's national language. It struck me as a gesture meant to prove his patriotism, except that it not only appeared rather contrived, but extremely dated. I'm sure he was sincere, but being in exile for the last 3 decades might have left him completely out of touch with what Singapore is today. Khoo's decision to use Malay, therefore, had the unfortunate effect of consigning the rest of the launch event into the dustbin of history. It made people think, these guys don't know what they are talking about. They are irrelevant to modern Singapore. Khoo also, according to Yawning Bread, Khoo also seemed really proud of a song, too proud, says Yawning Bread, appealing to Singapore's national flower. Alright, so Francis Khoo was talking about Bunga Raya, and he wrote a song called Bunga Raya, and I think he probably performed it. Okay, so Yawning Bread's objection was this. Okay, yes, he sang about Singapore's national flower, Bunga Raya, except that Bunga Raya, and the blogger had to explain, hibiscus, to give it its English name, because readers would know what Bunga Raya is, Singaporeans nowadays. Except that Bunga Raya is Malaysia's national flower, not Singapore's. He goes on, for a brief period between 1963 and 1965, when we were part of Malaysia, there was indeed a cheesy nation-building campaign celebrating the hibiscus as our national flower. But this ceased as soon as separation took place in August 1965. That Francis Khoo confused one patriotism with another, undermined his attempt to position himself as a loyal, if dissenting, Singaporean. Yawning Bread goes on. Ko Kei-Yew, who was one of the co-editors, picked up on Francis's theme, and Ko Kei-Yew said, we are the last of our generation. And he called his generation a pan-Malayan species. And Francis Khoo also said, Ko Kei-Yew also said, for people my age, Malaya was not some abstract political concept, but a social reality. One aspect of our common Malayan heritage is detention without trial. The blogger goes on. This sounds like an appeal to a Malaysian audience why the book they were launching might be relevant to them and one that they should buy. But if I repeated these words to Singaporeans, this was in KL, right? So if I go back to Singapore and I tell them this, okay, I think they will leave people cold. To the vast majority of Singaporeans today, the concept of Malaya is archaic, out of date. Anyone boasting of such credentials is casting himself as a fish out of water. I want to ask whether, in their view, a country can do away completely without detention, without trial, and whether a justifiable case can be made for such a law, right? Perhaps with more checks and balances as legitimate state response to violent extremists and terrorists, we should accept detention without trial. Okay, Alex goes on. It is related to an age-old conundrum. Must a democratic society give free rein to those who would use that freedom to destroy democracy? Not having enough time for my turn to ask that question, I guess we may never know their stand. Perhaps it doesn't matter that we may not know. perhaps it is a question for Singaporeans living in modern Singapore, not for those enamored of a bygone Malaya to answer. Okay, that's the end of the blog. Now, it is very evident that Alex Au walked into this room of strangers, of old people wearing batik shirts, one with bunga raya, but all trying to express some form of Malayanness, which to him was totally alienating, okay, and even pretentious. Right? So he was in fact turned off by these people trying to show some form of patriotism to a political system that we Singaporeans had rejected, totally out of date. Right? The strangeness, that these people are strangers, even aliens to our, okay, is not, I would say, was a common phenomenon in Singapore. Yet, the good poet Lee Su Ping, writing in the blurb of the book of poetry, had this to say, okay, that this volume of poems has the potential to surprise us with our own empathy, and to move and fortify us with the conviction of our essential freedom within circumstances few of us will experience at first hand. Alright? So, the way to appreciate this book is to uncover the lives of a particular group of people, okay, whom we do not know, but their circumstances is something that, because it comes through poetry, wins our sympathy and even surprises us, okay, for the feeling that we have for them. Alex Au did not see this. Now, I'm not condemning Alex Au, by the way. Okay? It is significant that this is in March 2009. I'm going on to say how Alex Au in fact changed his mind very quickly and why. That is the gist of my paper. How from Singapore nightmare, Alex and others have embraced the Malayan dream. But I'm just showing the sort of the, let's say, the hegemonic view. That's what most people think. Alright, we are not Malaysians, we don't want to be. Malay is our national language, but let's pretend that, and that's all, and that's all it matters. We don't have to speak it, we don't even have to remember that it's our national language. So, Alex's piece struck a group of us who at that time happened to form this e-journal called Spores, which is a play of course on Singapore's name, okay, S-P-O-R-E, the short form for Singapore, you put the plural, Spores. Okay? We had a meeting and we decided that as historians we want to respond, not to attack Alex, but to say how common this view is. And this common, the reason why this view is so common is because of the historic amnesia that has befallen Singapore. We don't know our past, we have been encouraged, urged, okay, to forget our historical past. Okay? So this whole thing about common sense history as given to us as what we learn in school, okay, what the government says and so forth, that period of history is the sort of, huge battle for the survival of Singapore between the forces of communism, okay, and the forces of whatever you want to call it, nationalism, perhaps, okay, which of course covers up the whole history of the anti-colonial movement in Singapore. Right. So what we did was to get this historian called Sai Xiu-Ming to write a critique of Alex's piece, and she talks, as I've mentioned quickly, the question of historical amnesia, the common senseness, how what we are told is our history has been ingrained so that it's almost commonsensical in Singaporeans, meaning that we accept without having to think why this is what we are told, right? So all this relates to the Internal Security Act as well. Okay? So the big question that Alex asked, we have to face this question Can a democratic country allow so much freedom that those who want to undermine democracy can use it? Okay? Now, this is actually a false proposition. The minute you frame your question this way, you already predetermine your answer. Okay? So, what we need to do is then to put this question in a historical context and say, in what instances was Internal Security Act used to detain who, all right, and on what grounds? So, Sumin also suggested, therefore, that we need to historicize this question, and if you do so, if you historicize the use of the Internal Security Act in the 1950s and 60s, you can see that it is the elimination of possible rivals to the PAP, especially in Operation Cold Storm, 1963, where 200 people and more were detained, okay, not very long before a general election, so that those who were detained were not able to stand for that election. Okay? So this is the kinds of argument that went on, okay, in this very limited space. Right? So Tsai Soon-Lin emphasized that the ISA was not only instrumental in shaping the political landscape of late colonial Malaya in Singapore. Detention without trial underwrote the formation of Malaysia and Singapore's achievement of independence through merger with Malaysia. So the ISD not only took away political rivals among others, but was also the core behind the formation of Malaysia. So this is the great irony that Tan Yin Kui pointed out in his book, Comet in the Sky, which was a volume on Lim Chin Siong, the left-wing, the sort of left-wing leader, the acknowledged left-wing leader in the 1950s and 60s. Okay. Now, Tan Yin Kui noted this irony. Okay, and the irony is that when we were in Malaysia, which was the dream, the Malayan dream come true, all right, but it wasn't. Okay, because of the nature of merger, it wasn't. Okay, it in fact led to the break-up of the Malayan dream. Okay, he put it this way: the real tragedy was that the cause of genuine reunification on fair and reasonable terms had been set back for a long time, obstructing and prejudicing any hope of fresh attempts for many years to come. It is difficult to imagine how ill-conceived that fateful venture in the early 60s can be It is difficult to imagine how that ill-conceived fateful venture in the early 60s can be historically defensible, as it resulted in betraying the ostensible aim of the vision of a united country. A new generation would grow up with the continuous tensions and mistrust that had their roots in the grim years of the 60s. It is now inevitable that a long time must elapse before a new realization can re-emerge for a fresh attempt to realize the unfinished task of national reunification. So not only was the Malayan dream in tatters after the 2 short years in Malaysia, it was so traumatic for the people of Singapore, okay, that any idea that we want to be part of Malaya, we want to be part of Malaysia, is treated as Alex Au put it, something that is totally, sort of frightening to Singaporeans. So, what is the Malaysia scheme? Okay. Now, I found an article that Tan Yin Kui wrote when he was in the University of Singapore in 1963, at the time when the merger debate was on. And this is what merger was about, according to him. Okay. The basic motivation is to mount up anti-communist hysteria with a purpose to rush through a freak arrangement whereby socialist strength will be excluded from the constitutional arena in the larger federation. The way to achieve this is to restrict the democratic rights of the people of Singapore so that they may not be in a position to exert an influence of political trends in the Federation. The federal government at the same time can utilize its control over internal security to curb tendencies in the name of anti-communism, which may be detrimental to their interests. Right? So merger itself is part of this larger scheme, okay, to eliminate socialist forces from both Singapore and Malaysia. This is what he is telling us. Okay? And so the dream was shattered. Okay? And from 1965 till, I would say, about the year 2000, very slowly, things heightened up in 2009 as I will account. Okay? Till now, we hear the Malayan dream again. Okay? So what is this Malayan dream? Okay? This Malayan dream is exactly what Professor Rahman Imbong talked to us about today, going back to the People's Constitution, going back to Putra AMCJA, right, of Singapore being part of Malaya, Melayu being the citizenship, Malay being the national language. Okay? In this period, this Malayan dream is being articulated. You can hear about this Malayan dream very much through the speeches of Dr. Po Su Kai. In December 2012, he met up with a group of young activists in KL. Okay, this group is called Collective Intelligence, who was doing a series, Lives on the Left. Okay? This group had wanted to learn from Dr. Po about the Barisan Socialists, okay? The opposition party, the most powerful and popular opposition party to the PAP in the early 1960s. Okay? Lim Chin Siong was the Secretary General, Po Su Kai was the Assistant Secretary General. Okay? On speaking to some of these young activists, Dr. Po discovered that he can't just talk about the Barisan Socialists, which was formed in July 1961. He had to go to the beginning, and the beginning was 1946. The Malayan Democratic Union, the MDU, which wrote the People's Constitution, and what we heard this morning, so forth. Okay? Now, this same narrative about the People's Constitution, the Malayan Dream, again was the theme for Dr. Po's talk on a very significant event, the 50th anniversary of Operation Cold Storm, which was on 2nd February 2013. A large commemoration event was held in Hong Lysa Speaker's Corner. Okay, the only space we have where you can hold, what they call it, the hype car and so forth, where you can make speeches, where you can hold rallies and things like that. On that occasion, he not only spoke at the Hong Lysa gathering, which was very, very well attended, okay, he also wrote a piece in Yawning Break, Alex Au's blog. Alex Au invited Dr. Po to write, and he did so with the title, Democracy and Human Rights in Deep Freeze, the Legacy of Operation Cold Storm. So what happened between March 2009, when Alex Au felt so alienated, okay, at the Puri book launch, and 2013 February, when he said, I want a piece like this on my blog page. Alex Au is sort of very protective about the quality of his blogs. Okay, to be invited means you're alright with him, he thinks you can do a good job. Okay, very hard to get invitations from him to write. Right? Let me account what happened after the book launch in KL that Yawning Break attended, which has to do with it. There are lots of events, but let me just give some of these. In 2009, June, that means not long after the publication of the book of poems, another publication came out by the same group of people Alright, I'll explain who these are later, called that we may dream again. That we may dream again. Okay? This is an account, short essays by the detainees in 1987 who were arrested in something called Operation Spectrum. Okay, I think there was a parallel here too. They were arrested, and the people who were arrested included a group that was from the Catholic Church workers. And in 2009, June, they put together this volume telling their stories. Okay? By this time, I think Alex found that these people were people he could identify with. Because these group of people, we argue, are basically social workers, whether it be church workers, human rights workers, whatever the case may be. Right? And he said, look, I'm into these causes. These people are into these causes. I can identify with them. And so gradually he becomes part of this network. Okay? And it's not the only one. Okay? We have more and more commemoration. Any event we will commemorate. You know, that is of course meaningful to the left. They began very slowly, people were afraid to come. Okay? But the momentum has started. The detainee groups of 1987 is very, very important. They are the younger group, I said younger meaning by now in the 1960s, right? But they were the earlier social activists. Okay? They took up issues of the factory workers, they took up issues of foreign labor, okay, that were badly treated, right? But they helped out with rival political parties, with the PAP, and the combination of all this is that they were arrested. Even the official accounts, right? Even the official accounts will tell you that this group, the arrests of this group, is the least defensible. Right? Even ministers have come out to say, we should not have done that. So, the power of this group is that they're not only talking about themselves, they have linked themselves with the older generation batch of former detainees, the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. They are the ones with the energy, with the links to other connections in civil society and so forth, okay, to hold these kinds of events. Okay? So whenever we have an event like this, they will be, for one thing, you know, organizing the logistics, right? I can tell you the older folks don't know how to apply online to use Hong Lysa. Okay? All have to wait for this group to do so. Okay? They also are very good at publications. So every event, there will be a commemorative volume. Okay? And these are very important documentations. Right? So this group has formed itself into a handful of them, 6, 7, 8, okay, called Function 8, whose motto is restart, rejuvenate, reclaim. Okay. Restart the engine, okay, that has been more or less turned off from the time they were released from detention, rejuvenate their dreams, reclaim their place in Singapore society and Singapore history. So, I mentioned just now Dr. Po's speech in Hong Lysa Park on 2nd February 2013. He titled the speech, The Dream, 50 years later. And again, he accounted what the Malayan dream was. It is about a new and independent nation called Malaya, embracing Singapore, a multicultural nation in which all communities will be treated equally. A nation that will be independent of British colonial rule, where there will be respect for human rights, democracy, social justice, freedom from starvation, freedom of expression and assembly. Okay? The British, of course, had different ideas. Dr. Po was not the final speaker. The final speaker was Teo So Lang, again, who moved from being a non-person to being a person when she wrote her biography, when she wrote her memoir, Beyond the Blue Gate. Okay? It was a very important book. The first, really, that details so carefully her thoughts, her fears, her struggles, her disappointments, and so forth in detention. And she became a person. She even ran for the elections, knowing that she would lose, but making the point that political detainees have every right to stand for elections. And again, this is what then galvanized people like Alex and others in civil society to be able to identify, to be able to work with, collaborate with, support, and so forth, all these ventures, just as they too got into, their helped out in other organizations other than themselves. So Teo Solang was a final speaker at this event on at Hong Lysa Gardens at the 50th anniversary. Okay. They were the organizers of this event, and they chose the title for the event, We Remember. We Remember, and Dr. Solang followed Dr. Po's speech. Okay? And Solang spoke on the abuse of the ISA, and she ended by turning to Dr. Po to thank him, Said Zahari, and the survivors of Operation Cold Storm for liberating us from the rule of the colonialists. To me, this is the passing on, okay, to the passing on of a Malayan dream that lives on, at least in this corner, okay, of the Singapore political life. Now, I was going to end on this high note. By the way, I forgot to talk about Daun Kasong. Remember, I was talking about this group called Collective Intelligence that invited Dr. Po to talk. Now, I'm not a blogger, and I don't surf the net and all that, so I don't have Facebook. So there's lots more materials for me to hunt for, but I didn't. I just managed to get something. A blog page by Daun Kasong, okay, Fagi, young fellow in his 30s, I think. He was at Dr. Po's talk in KL, and he noted in his blog that Dr. Po often paid homage to the Malay left, as a matter of fact, mentioning names such as Burhanuddin Helmi, Ahmad Bostama, Pak Sako, alright, with Ishaq Haji Muhammad. These names, says Daun Kasong, these names inspire a certain type of ideal in contrast to the prescribed role models of Lieutenant Adnan and Hang Tuah. He also noted that the standard version is often full of precautionary tales about racial strife and discord, if not for the presence of draconian laws. That means we needed draconian laws, otherwise we have racial strife and discord. However, says Daun Kasong, Dr. Po's narrative turns this tale on their head. It was repression which destroyed the solidarity of the races to break the united front against colonialism. Daun Kasong concluded that the history that Dr. Po delineated was like a rope which gives clarity to Singapore's past, the contemporary situation, and what lies ahead. So, to the teaser, to the nice epigram put up by Professor Rahman Embong this morning about victors writing history and losers writing poetry and memoirs, I think that we also see history starting to emerge, perhaps as part of memoirs, as part of memory, okay, by people who have lived through that period and are now historicizing their own life, okay, their own ideals, whatever it is, okay, so that this can be part, okay, of a Singapore story as well. Now I was going to end there, happy ending and all that, and I contacted the organizers to say, "Guy, I don't think I can cover 50 minutes. Okay? And they said, never mind, but would you like to show this? But do you know of this little filmlet, 3 minutes? And I thought, oh, this is perfect. I know this filmlet, never thought I could use it. Okay? So, let me tell you a bit about the filmlet and then you'll see it. It was, the filmlet is called Happy and Free. Okay? It is done by this film director called Wu Jun-feng, okay, whom I will talk about later. Okay? And it is a It is based on a song which was played over and over again during the days where the government was propagating merger. I had to sing it in school. Alright, it's very catchy, it's very fun. Let's see what Wu Junfeng has done to this. 2013 biennial, so just last year. Okay? And then I'll mention a few words about what this clip says to me. Right? Right. Now, the person who made this film is a young man in his 30s with the name of Wu Junfeng. Okay? In 2011, Wu Junfeng came out with a feature film called Sandcastle, okay, which was an award-winning film overseas. Okay. Sandcastle was about a boy turning into man, 18 years old, about to go into the army. Okay? He's somehow a fairly irritated little young man, doesn't seem to be happy, a bit uptight. His father has passed away. He lives with his mother, who is even more uptight than he is. Okay? There's something about it that strains their relationship. Okay? He gets on better with his grandparents. The strain comes from this, that the family has been hiding something from him. Okay? The father, who has died, was a political detainee from a Chinese middle school. He came as a political detainee. The mother was spared. Okay? Even though, in the course of the film, we learned that she was more active than him, she was more left than him. Okay? But she escaped imprisonment, he went into prison. So this film is about this boy finally discovering all this, mainly through his grandparents. In the meantime, he himself, as I said, has very strained relations with his mother. The mother has a new beau, he's going out with a guy who's a colonel in the army, who's responsible for the next big National Day parade. He's commander for the National Day parade. Okay? The mother teaches in a junior college, she conducts a choir, she teaches these National Day songs to the students. Okay? And somehow something he feels is wrong. By the way, the mother is also a very fervent Christian. Okay? Very fervent Christian. So he's not happy. Okay? When he finally learns of why, when he finally learns of his parents' background, he understands why the mother behaves the way she does. Okay? He accepts it, right? He embraces her, but more or less he walks away. Okay? What he doesn't carry with him, alright, at least that's how I read it, what he doesn't carry away with him is the burden of that past. What he carries away with him is the knowledge of that past for him to live the life that he wants to make out of that. Right? He doesn't have to put down everything he does and pick up his parents' cause. That's not the point. And Wu Junfeng does this very cleverly. Alright? Yes, he uses historical, he does his historical research and so forth, but he, I think, purposely mixes up facts here and there a bit, okay? So that it, so that it isn't so much a history class for his audience, okay? So that the whole point we want to look at is the suppression of memory rather than what actually happened in the past. Right? Now, that helps me to understand this little clip. Okay? He explains what Happy and Free is about. He says, in Happy and Free, the reality of Singapore I am presenting is not actually very different from the one we have today. It is very interesting to me how so many people expect it to be a different reality, almost as if it needs to be so. I cannot help but feel that we have somehow been conditioned to think that way. What if things didn't turn out very differently? Okay? So the whole the theme of the Biennale 2013 is if the world changed. Right? So to think of alternate kinds of realities. What Wu Junfeng does is to pick this reality, okay, alternate reality of what happens if we did break up with Malaysia. Okay? And his imagination, alright, he is ready to imagine that, hey, it would not have been bad at all. Okay? We would be as prosperous as we are now. We will have the MRT stations as we are now. We could be happy. Okay? Now, for that kind of imagination to exist, I would argue that it requires putting down the burden of the past. It is a reply to Tan Jin He. and it is a reply also to the questions that were floating just now. I think William raised it, somebody else did, maybe this, to say that, how long must we wait before we can contemplate Malaysia and Singapore coming together again? If we think of the Malaysian years of Singapore, 1963 to 1965, as Jin Hui said, it's so traumatic, it's so deep, the kinds of wounds that we cannot contemplate. But what happens if we think, okay, we know what happened, we don't have to be burdened by that. Okay? We can establish new imaginations with Malaysia, with Malaysians. Okay? Then, this becomes a possibility, and we break out from that conventional mode that we talked about, that is almost a necessity that Singaporeans think. That, how did he put it? Yeah, that a different reality has to be a negative one. Okay? I can't help but feel that we have somehow been conditioned to think that way. Alright, that we can't have, that Singapore cannot be happy as Malaysia. Right? It's a very big leap of faith. It is a leap that says our history has set us in a certain direction. Can we keep that faith? And yet, can we accept our history and yet move forward from there? Okay? And I think it is people of his generation, okay, people like Jun Feng, people on stage, people who are doing drama, theatre, filmmaking, and so forth, they have very good relations with the Malaysians. Okay? And I think it is at this level, okay, that maybe the lightness of history, okay, will come to pass, okay, will lead us to something that the burden of history, okay, may make, takes a longer path. Alright? Yes, it is important that we have our books on Operation Cold Store, we have our speeches, we have our writing of history, writing RIGHT, putting it right, writing of history and so forth. It is very important. But we cannot burden the younger generation, nor will they accept the burden, okay, as the only way to move ahead. It provides a groundwork. How it takes off in a different direction, I would say, is perhaps beyond what, beyond the activities that, how am I going to put it, that I have been narrating. Okay, thank you.
从那个早期的这个 AMCJA、布特拉这些人民宪章开始的一个马来亚，包括新加坡的一个统一的一个团结的国家，各自团结的国家的一个梦。从那个时候开始到50年代，马来半岛的左翼，新加坡的左翼，一直到后来60年代的左翼，特别新加坡的这个50年代的社会主义俱乐部，后来的社会主义阵线等等这一辈人的，他们的一个梦，就是一个团结的马来亚和新加坡的一个梦，延续到今天。但是这个梦呢，一再的被击碎，被当权者。被这个我们讲马来西亚计划是一个新殖民主义的计划，被这个殖民主义，被这些半岛和新加坡的当权者呢，一次又一次的击败。那么对新加坡的新一代来说呢，马来亚梦对他们来讲，他们根本是没办法理解，他没有办法理解这个概念。但是又讲到呢，我们说这近年来呢，在新加坡。新一代也开始重新的反思，我们知道里维西定马来亚，我们说重返马来亚，在概念上的反思啊，已经开始在年轻人在开始反思，或者结合到中老一代的人呢，在进行这个工作。而在马来半岛呢，叫马来西亚，叫马来亚，我们讲马来半岛呢，这个年轻一代的，特别是年轻一代的这个马来人呢，也正在寻找过去的历史。所以为什么在去年还是前年的我们的国庆日啊，有一个另外一个旗子在漂洋，那个沙嘎的旗子在漂洋。我是今年在问 这是什么棋子？这是怎么回事？过去的历史是怎么样的？所以他们已经在马来西亚也相当活跃的，还有他们也开始书写，开始出版一些书，所以这种现象呢，都是一种改变的现象，改变的现象。但是是不是能够重回实现过去的梦想呢？不知道，或者过去的马来亚的梦呢，会以另一种新的形式出现？那我也不知道，那我们也不知道，也许是我们相信。总之会，我们的这个马来半岛和新加坡呢，都会向更好的发展。当然，马来半岛和新加坡的统一不是不可能实现，我本身的看法啦，不是不可能实现的。是怎么样的实现呢？怎么样的统一呢？那还不知道，但是这是有可能的。好，历史的宣告我不要说太多。So now I open the floor. So any comment and any question? Yeah.
他要发问，
他要发问，这么快啊？
对。
哎，等一下。Hold on. I think we collect 3 questions or comment, and then we give Lisa the answer.
Imagine, but I may not be as wild in imagination as this. But actually, I'm quite touched by your presentation. That's why I want to to give my thoughts and some comments, and maybe I got some questions for it. Actually, because I think that for us to really to return to Malaya is actually, I think for me it's impossible, because I think for us, maybe when we are talking about Malaya or when we're talking about Singapore and Malaysia, we are thinking it, imagine or envisioning it as a nation state. I think, but I have a great problems with this imagination or envisioning of this vision of a nation state, as Malaya as a nation state. Because I think when we are revisiting this Malaya, the concept of Malaya, actually I'm more thinking of something of, I'm trying to envision or imagine, maybe from the first step of imagining, is more of a solidarity or community between the two countries, so that we can care for each other more. Because sometimes when, for example, in 2013 last year, actually there's a haze problem from the Indonesia, and actually because it's actually a regional influence for Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia. But we know that there's a lot of problems when we are trying to push for some policies to curb these companies that are causing all these pollutions and everything. But because each of the countries, because of the construction of the nation state, so we are actually hindering the progress between how we can curb all these companies. So, okay, so my question is actually, so if we are revisiting Malaya, so actually this question is for Lisa, maybe for all the distinguished professors over here, and I'm just wondering whether for the concept of Malaya, is it right from the beginning, is it only imagination of a nation state? Because from Lisa's paper, actually we can say that they actually feel for the people in the 50s and 60s, when they are imagining about a nation state, imagining about Malaya, they are actually thinking of they felt that it's a social reality, and it's not really to them, it's not only a political concept, which I think is very important, because I don't think when we are going to rethink about Malaya, if there's really a major between Singapore and Malaysia, it's not really about a political major. At least that is what, because I really think that is not possible. Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. So, second question, yeah.
My name is Josh, and I'm a Malaccan by birth, but I grew up in Johor, southern Johor actually. So, as many Chinese Johorians whose loyalty is constantly in doubt in Malaysia, people, the Barisan National tend to think that Johorians' loyalty lies with Singapore rather than with Malaysia. And I'm not ashamed to say that I learned to sing Majulah Singapura before I could actually sing Negaraku. But of course I sing both right now. Anyway, my question is really before we go back to this broken vision of Malaya. I think so much has happened over the last few decades, and if you look at Malaysian society today, even within Chinese society in this country, you can see somehow Singapore has come up as a model, as an ideal state that really appeals to the imaginations of a lot of Chinese Malaysians. Very often we'll have friends who tell us that if we cross the causeway over to Singapore, I will be so successful, my talent will be appreciated, and it is a multicultural country, and it really values my talent, and it really values whatever that I have, in mind. So basically, it's like to the younger Malaysians, Chinese Malaysians, Singapore has successfully established itself as an ideal nation state that respects the rights of others, so on and so forth. However, if you talk to Malay Singaporeans, perhaps their feelings, I actually have Malay friends, very close Malay friends, who migrated from Singapore to Malaysia because they feel that the vision there, the vision that they used to be, or their forefathers believed in, had been betrayed also by the very partner that dealt with, that at one time dealt very closely with Tunku Abdul Rahman and all that. And we know why, because you can see the stigmatizing nature or policy of Singapore government today, bringing in mainland Chinese and all that, diluting the so-called, the Southeast Asian nature or the Malay nature of Singapore Islands. So I would say to some extent, Singaporeans, Malay Singaporeans and Chinese Malaysians are the alter ego of one another. We think that is an ideal state across the border, and perhaps many of the Malays there will think the same of Malaysia today without actually feeling, the kind of marginalization, the kind of fear that a lot of non-Malays have to experience. One more with this Isma, Gasa, Mahathir, all the racist rhetoric and all that. So to me, it's like, how do we address all this? It's like we need to explain to Chinese Malaysians like what you see in Singapore today. May not be the, if you talk to a non-Chinese in Singapore, he or she could probably tell you a very different story from what you have seen or from what you have experienced. And likewise, if you talk to the Chinese Malaysians, perhaps his loyalty or his feelings, his sentiments about Malaysia would be very different from what Malay Singaporeans imagine Malaysia to be. I think we need to deal with both. Because this is a very real issue for the young generations. If we want to go back to talking about Malaya of the 1940s and 1950s, but we have to also talk about the nation states as we see in Singapore and Malaysia today. Are they really based on civil rights? Are they really based on civic consciousness? And very much related to what this young man has said just now. Is it a nation state that Malaya would imagine Malaya to be? And how are we going to deal with cultural rights, minority rights, mother tongue education, Islamic policies like Malaysia? I fully understand the Muslim community would have a different vision for the country, and so do the Chinese in this country. We have a very different vision, and how do we reconcile all this before we can actually go back to talking about that broken vision? And finally, how did Malaysia come about? Malaysia came about precisely because the so-called imperialists had a plan to prevent the region from turning left, from turning communist and all that. And of course, we know that Malaysians, many Malaysians do not want to be like Singaporeans. Singaporeans do not want to be like Malaysians. But both Singaporeans and Malaysians do not want to be like Indonesians. And it is all because of this fantasy and all that. However, if you look at Indonesia today, if you look at the political transition, I lived in Jakarta for several months. I really fully enjoyed it. I was enthralled, I was enchanted by the diversity of the city, the diversity of the culture, the liberalism, the liberal ideas that many, you have the most radicals, the most liberal, the kind of diversity, the kind of enthusiasm for the country's future. I think, have we missed out something? Have we missed out on the experience of Indonesia? Perhaps we have to spend more time looking at that as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Question to ask Lisa. Do you think I have a chance to revisit Singapore?
I think we need to push rather than just to wait for the day to happen. Okay? If for the past 50 years we have been silent and we have continued with that silence, nothing would have happened. With the pushing, I think that there has been an acknowledgement that in certain things, we have the facts, we have the documents, it is as we have said. Okay? I think on Operation Cold Store, we have not really been challenged to say, you all haven't read this document correctly. It is simply, if there was any reaction, it's simply a reply to say that, what is it now? Operation Cold Store. Oh, let me put it this way. Recently, a big government think tanker, by the name of Kishore Mahbubani, very big up there, actually said, come on, we are so open now. There's books on Operation Cold Store, there's books on by function 8 on exiles, on Francis School and this and that. What's the big deal? History is open, you want to write, you write. Which to me means that they've got no choice. They've got no choice because Singapore claims itself to be a global city. It wants to attract global capital, it wants to attract global talent, it wants Yale University to issue joint degrees with NUS. You can't do anything that closes the mind that easily anymore. Right? So, I suggest you write your story. Yeah, so I finished with that first. The most exciting to me, to hear that you want to come back, The other two comments by a younger Singaporean and a younger Malaysian, Johor, not quite Singaporean, the Singapore fantasy, the Malayan dream, I don't know. I find it hard to answer because I think you are both, I don't know whether this is what you both are saying, but we are limited if we only think of state structures, if we only think of official kinds of interactions. Now, I thought big. I'm very ashamed to say that I don't come to Malaysia. Alright? I get totally lost. I only come when somebody is sending me here or I'm invited to a conference or whatever. I don't have relatives in KL or Malaysia, and very hard for me to find reasons to come. Okay? So, who am I to say, you guys got to have greater interaction, because I think you all are already doing so. The haze problems, the questions of the haze problems is a great one. Do we have Singapore groups interested in environment to contact with the Malaysians? Alright? The question that sort of you raised to Josh is very much a question of the racial categories that we still stick by. In Singapore as well as in Malaysia. In Singapore, we really like to think that, we are meritocracy, race is not an issue, everyone has a chance and all that. Is that the case? Alright? So these are issues that I think you can, we don't have to wait for the government to say, we passed a legislation to say this, that, the other. Right? It is something that has got to be done at a more, how am I going to put it, collegial level, okay, human level, and I think that's going on. Just as I try come again, Singapore is a better place for Malaysians where their talents are appreciated. Yes, okay. Singaporeans look at Malaysians and say, "Wow, first say, when are we ever going to reach that day?" And seriously, with great admiration. So I suppose there's no perfect spot on earth, certainly not in our spot of the earth. And it's what we try to do. Okay? I don't know if that addresses what you're going to say, but that's all I think I'm in a position to offer. Thanks.
Okay, I think we have 5 minutes more. Informed by but limited copy for today. It's okay with myself. Okay, so Kevin, sorry, Kevin.
Hi, Lisa. I'm Kai Ping. I'm currently coming on internet TV. Anyway, my question is, Yes, I mean, you present us an antagonistic reason, a pair relationship between Malayan dream, maybe of the broken Malayan dream by the leftists and stuff like that, and Singapore nightmare for both Malaysia and Singapore states discourse, right? So, I mean, I think my question is, I think our challenge is how do we address the new relationship between the both nation states, right? So one that is so close, but that we are so different. I mean, it's quote unquote different, right? So I mean, maybe I was thinking of how do we present a new imagination? How do we start a new discourse about that, which is maybe came from the civil society, came from the people, from the publics. But I think we need more than that, besides going back to the challenging the history and stuff like that. And how do we present the projects? You know, I mean, take an example, EU projects between Germany and France and stuff like that. I mean, how can we do something projects like that? I mean, non-state project, but a kind of imagination, a discourse. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just quickly wrap that for the next question? Because all I can say is yes, you can do that. No, I don't mean to be rude, but all I'm trying to say is that I don't have the answers. Okay, I am very well aware of my limitations and inclinations. I tend to work in very close academic spheres. I am not active in civil society beyond that in Singapore. Okay, I admire greatly people who are, in various causes and so forth. But I find that that's not my temperament. And I hope that people like you and others in this room, can think of what you are doing and try to think of it in a larger scale. Okay, picture, sort of I don't have the answers.
Hi Lisa, Daniel who shuttles between here and Singapore and often. I want to talk about your comparison between Wu Feng's Happy and Free in relation to Alex Au's article. I thought that provoked a lot of questions because first of all, I like Wu Feng's films, but being someone who was also sort of researched a bit on the era that he's trying to portray. It's really amazing that someone as young as him is able to understand a lot of context. But yet there are sort of glitches here and there, some certain inaccuracies with history, that which we can sort of forsake for this larger, if not very slightly shaky idea of what happened in history, so that modern model of history. Compared with Alex Au, for those of you who don't know his work. Usually he will come up with complete facts and figures, a whole set of arguments against certain things. For someone to have such an attitude towards this period of history is actually quite jarring. So thank you for showing us that we even if Wu Feng's model of imagining what Malaya was and what the history of life, and even how sort of the slightly sort of defects in there. It's a model that actually we can take with us and we can wear with us. But the second point I want to make is a lot more challenging because even right now there is a lot of problems along the Straits of Johor, just between the Iskandar project and Singapore, Orang Seletar being kicked out, and Orang Seletar ironically was a problem for Singapore because in the 1950s the colonial government kicked them out of Singapore's Seletar River and they moved up north, and now no one wants to claim them. And at the same time there is a lot of environmental damage, much more than the haze is going to be for all the capital cities. So I do think that there are very big challenges that actually both sides, either on the sort of social level and collegiate level, as you say, a lot of other groups have to come together to really solve very pressing environmental problems.
Thank you. I think this is the last, okay. Last question and or comment. One of it.
Thank you. It's a very clear, passionate, and powerful presentation on reliving the Malayan dream. Now, two very short comments. One is to reiterate the question by Saudara Rancen, when can I revisit Singapore, which I visited in the 1970s, which I still cannot visit. But only in ideas and interactions. Second point is, one of my friends who happened to review my book on Malaysia at a crossroads said this, and I think it applies also here, that one of the ways to realize a dream is to wake up. And I think precisely that waking up then to the dream, after the dream, is to realize a dream is very important. And I think the pointers that have been coming up from the discussions this morning and this afternoon indicate what should we be aware of, the new things that are emerging today in the process of our waking up, or the reawakening, if you want to put it that way. Our young friend just now mentioned something about beyond state structures, yes, and focusing on people's solidarities. I think that will be the way forward. And the experiences of other countries, other regions like EU and even Indonesia, I think will be useful. So why not we look into building solidarities across the causeway rather than quarrels.
Very good. Okay, this one last. Very short, very short.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm touched. Born 10 years after Malaysia. I'd like to look back at 1965, thinking that the partition, the separation was actually quite mathematical. A failed attempt for two-party system end up as two one-party state par excellence. And both Malaysia and Singapore now represent very different view of nation building, or at least they want to impose that to their population. And I think if there is any chance that we get closer before any change of international boundary, would be some sort of convergence in how we organize our national life. When both countries have regime change and they're moving closer to the middle, then perhaps we can think of what Egypt and Syria did in the 60s. Thank you.
So okay, I think time's up, and then thank you very much for Lisa, and thank you very much for everybody. Now we need to wake up and action.
Thank you so much. You can carry on talking at the outside. We have prepared tea break for you for 10 minutes. So please come back here at 4:10. Thanks.